The wedding breakfast at Hartwick Hall was meant to prove that the Duke of Ravenholt had finally put grief behind him. Every candle in the grand dining room had been lit, every silver fork had been polished, until it caught the morning sun. Every portrait of dead Ravenholt ancestors had been dusted and straightened, as if the old dukes and duchesses themselves had been ordered to approve the new marriage. At the head of the room stood Lady Clarissa Renford, now Duchess of Ravenholt. She was beautiful in the way society admired most, pale, composed, dressed in ivory silk, with diamonds at her throat and a smile trained to look gentle from a distance. Beside her stood her husband, Edmund Ashford, Duke of Ravenholt, tall, dark, restrained, and silent. He had buried his first wife, Lady Beatrice, 3 years earlier. Since then, he had spoken little, smiled less, and raised his son as if love were something that could be managed by governesses, tutors, and carefully timed visits. The boy, Lord Oliver Ashford, was only 6. He stood at the far end of the room, in a small blue coat, staring at his new stepmother with the solemn face of a child who had learned too early that adults often lied when they smiled. The guests watched him. Clarissa watched him. The Duke watched no one. Then Lady Clarissa opened her arms. "Come here, Oliver," she said sweetly. "Come greet your new mother." The word mother struck the room like a dropped glass. The boy's face changed. Not with confusion, not with shyness, with terror. For a moment, he stood frozen. Then he ran. Gasps rose from the table. But Oliver did not run to the Duke. He did not run to the nursery door. He did not hide beneath the table, as nervous children sometimes do when overwhelmed by ceremony and strangers. He ran straight past the Duchess of Ravenholt, straight past the footmen, straight past the ladies with their hands over their mouths, and threw himself into the arms of a maid, standing near the sideboard. The maid's name was Eliza Bell. She was 23, plain-dressed, quiet, and so used to being unseen that, until that moment, half the guests had not noticed she was in the room. But Oliver clung to her as though she were the only safe place left in the world. "Don't let her take me," he whispered. Eliza's face went white. The room heard him. Everyone heard him. The Duchess lowered her arms slowly. Her smile did not vanish. That was the first thing Eliza noticed. It only hardened. The Duke turned sharply toward his son. "Oliver." The boy pressed his face into Eliza's apron. Clarissa gave a soft laugh, a careful laugh, the kind used to cover humiliation. "Poor child," she said, "such nerves. It is a great change for him." Eliza felt Oliver's fingers tighten around her sleeve. The Duke's eyes moved to her. Not kindly, not cruelly, suspiciously. "Miss Bell," he said. Release him." Eliza curtsied awkwardly, but Oliver's arms locked around her waist. "Your Grace," she said quietly, "he is frightened. He is disobedient." The word struck Eliza harder than it should have. Disobedient. That was the word always used when no one wished to ask why a child was afraid. Clarissa stepped closer, silk whispering across the floor. "Oliver, darling," she said, "you must come to me now." Oliver shook his head violently. "I don't want the White Lady." The guests froze. Clarissa's face flashed with insult. The Duke's jaw tightened. "Oliver Ashford." Eliza lowered herself slightly and whispered, "My lord, breathe. No one will pull you." But Clarissa heard. Her eyes sharpened. "No one will pull him," she repeated. "Do servants now instruct the family on how to behave?" Eliza bowed her head. "No, your Grace. Then perhaps you should remember where you stand." Oliver began to shake. The Duke saw it. For a brief second, pain crossed his face. Then it vanished beneath pride. "Take him upstairs," he ordered. Eliza nodded, but Clarissa raised a hand. "No." Every head turned. The Duchess smiled again. My husband's son cannot be carried away by a maid like a frightened kitten whenever he is displeased. He must learn his place in this house. Eliza looked at the Duke, hoping he would object. He did not. Clarissa held out her hand to Oliver again. Come. Oliver whispered something against Eliza's sleeve. Only Eliza heard it. She smells like the locked room. Eliza's blood chilled. The locked room. No one spoke of the locked room. Not in the nursery. Not below stairs. Not anywhere in Hartwick Hall. It was the west dressing room that had belonged to the late Duchess Beatrice. After her death, the Duke ordered it sealed. The key remained in his private study, and anyone who entered the West Wing without permission was dismissed. At least, that was what everyone believed. Eliza looked at Clarissa. The Duchess was still smiling, and on her wrist, half hidden beneath lace, was a bracelet of tiny pearls with a blue enamel clasp. Eliza had seen that bracelet before. In a portrait of the late Duchess. Her Grace Beatrice had worn it on the day Oliver was born. The bracelet should have been locked away in the West Room. The room no one entered. The room the child had just mentioned. Eliza's heart began to beat faster. My lord, she said softly to the Duke, perhaps Lord Oliver should rest. Clarissa's smile disappeared. Perhaps, she said, Miss Bell should leave this house before supper. Oliver cried out. No! His panic broke something in the room. The Duke stepped forward. That is enough. For 1 second, Eliza hoped he was speaking to Clarissa, but his eyes were on her. Take him upstairs. Then report to Mrs. Dawley. We will discuss your position. Eliza understood what that meant. Dismissal. Not today, perhaps, but soon. Because a maid who became necessary to a child was dangerous in a house that preferred obedience. She carried Oliver upstairs, not because she wished to defy anyone, but because he would not unclench his fists from her dress. Behind her, whispers spread through the dining room. By nightfall, they would become scandal. By morning, they would become blame, and all of it would fall on the maid. In the nursery, Oliver sat by the window, pale and exhausted. Eliza knelt before him. My lord, you must tell me what you meant. He shook his head. The White Lady, he nodded. You mean Her Grace. I don't want her to be my mother. Eliza softened. No one can replace your mother. She said she can. When? Oliver looked towards the nursery door. Yesterday. Eliza went still. You saw the Duchess yesterday? He nodded. She came when Nanny Pike was asleep. Nanny Pike had been with the Ashford family for 30 years. Old and stern but loyal. She never slept during duty hours. Never. Eliza forced her voice to remain calm. What did Her Grace say? Oliver rubbed his sleeve across his eyes. She said Papa was tired of me remembering. She said, good boys forget dead mothers when new ones arrive. Eliza felt anger rise so quickly she had to press her hands together. Anything else? Oliver whispered. She said if I told Papa, she would send you away. There it was, the true chain around the child's throat, not fear for himself, fear for her. Eliza turned toward the fireplace so Oliver would not see her face. 3 years ago, she had entered Hartwick Hall as a laundry maid. She had expected nothing from the house except work. Then the old nursery maid fell ill, and Eliza was sent upstairs to help. Oliver had been 3 then, silent after his mother's death, refusing food, refusing sleep, refusing anyone who tried too hard to comfort him. Eliza had not tried hard. She had sat on the nursery floor and mended stockings while he cried in the corner. The second night, she hummed. The third, he came closer. The 5th, he fell asleep with one hand wrapped around her apron string. Since then, Eliza had been told again and again that she must not become attached. But no one had told a grieving child how to stop attaching himself to the only person who stayed. A knock sounded at the nursery door. Eliza turned. The Duke stood there. Oliver shrank. Edmund Ashford saw it. His face tightened. "Leave us," he said to Eliza. Oliver gripped her sleeve. The Duke noticed. "Oliver, release Miss Bell." The child whispered, "Please." Eliza looked from the child to the father. "Your Grace, he has had a difficult morning." The Duke's voice lowered. "I am aware. Then perhaps—" "Do not instruct me on my son." Eliza lowered her eyes, but she did not move. The Duke stepped inside and closed the door. "I said, leave us." Oliver began to tremble again, and then, against every rule of service, station, and survival, Eliza said, "No." The Duke stared at her. The words seemed to echo through the nursery. No servant said no to the Duke of Ravenholt. Not twice, perhaps not even once. But Eliza lifted her chin. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace, but he is afraid. I can see that." "Then ask why." The Duke's eyes darkened. "Do you imagine I have not?" "No," Eliza said quietly. "I imagine you asked in the voice of a man who already feared the answer." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Oliver watched from the window seat, wide-eyed. The Duke took one step closer to Eliza. "I could dismiss you before luncheon." "Yes, Your Grace. And yet you continue." "Yes. Why?" Eliza looked at Oliver. "Because he cannot afford my silence." Something changed in the Duke's expression. Not softness, not surrender, but attention, true attention. The kind he had perhaps not given anyone in years. He turned to his son. "Oliver." The boy looked down. "Did the Duchess say something to you?" Oliver's lip trembled. The Duke's voice became rougher. "Son." Eliza could feel the old mistake forming. Command first, tenderness too late. She spoke gently. "My lord, your father is asking, not ordering." The Duke's gaze flickered to her. Then back to Oliver. He tried again, quieter. "Oliver, did Lady Clarissa frighten you?" the child whispered. "She went into Mamma's room." The Duke went still. "What?" "She had Mamma's bracelet." The air in the nursery turned cold. Eliza saw the Duke's face drain of colour. Oliver continued, voice shaking. "She said Mamma was gone, because Papa wanted a prettier Duchess. She said if I cried today, Papa would send Miss Bell away, and then I would have no one." The Duke closed his eyes. For one brief moment, the powerful man disappeared. Only a father remained. A father who had not known what had happened under his own roof. Then he turned toward Eliza. "The bracelet. On Her Grace's wrist this morning," Eliza said. His face hardened. "The West Room has been locked for 3 years. Yes, Your Grace. The key is in my study." Eliza hesitated. "What is it?" he asked. She knew the answer could ruin her, but silence now would be worse. "Your Grace," she said, 2 nights ago, I saw Lord Halrick leaving your study after midnight." The Duke's eyes sharpened. Lord Halrick Vane, Clarissa's brother. A charming, debt-ridden gentleman who had arrived with the wedding party and laughed too loudly at dinner. "What was he doing there?" "I do not know." "Why did you not report it?" "Because servants who accuse gentlemen are usually dismissed before gentlemen are questioned." The Duke said nothing. He could not deny it. A bell rang below. The sound of guests moving again. Life, continuing as though no child had been wounded, no locked room opened, no dead woman's memory disturbed. The Duke went to the door, then stopped. "Miss Bell." "Yes, Your Grace. Until I say otherwise. You will remain with Oliver." Oliver looked up. Hope entered his face so quickly it hurt to see. Eliza curtsied. "And Your Grace?" The Duke paused. "The Duchess must not be alone with him." He did not answer at once. Then he said, very quietly, "No." Downstairs, Lady Clarissa still wore the dead Duchess's bracelet, and somewhere in Hartwick Hall a locked room had been opened. But by whom, and for what purpose? The wedding had begun with a child running to a maid. Before nightfall, the Duke would understand it was not embarrassment. It was a warning. By evening, the laughter had returned to Hartwick Hall. Guests who had gasped at breakfast now pretended they had seen nothing. Ladies spoke of flowers, gentlemen spoke of horses, and everyone avoided mentioning the moment the Duke's son had run past his new bride, as though she were carrying a curse. But under the polite surface, the house had changed. Servants moved more quietly. Doors were watched. Whispers stopped when Lady Clarissa entered a room. And in the nursery, Lord Oliver slept with one fist wrapped in Eliza Bell's apron, as if even dreams might try to take her away. The Duke did not return until after supper. When he did, he was not alone. Mrs. Dawley, the housekeeper, followed him, carrying a lamp and a ring of keys. Eliza rose at once. "Your Grace!" The Duke looked toward Oliver, asleep on the narrow nursery bed. "Has anyone come?" "No." "Has anyone sent a message?" "No, Your Grace." Mrs. Dawley's mouth tightened. "There was a request from Her Grace." Eliza turned. "What request?" the Duke answered. "That Oliver be moved to the blue nursery." Eliza frowned. The blue nursery had not been used since before Oliver was born. It stood close to the west wing, close to the locked room. The Duke saw her understanding. "I refused." Mrs. Dawley's face remained stern, but there was relief in her eyes. Then the Duke held out his hand. In his palm lay the blue enamel clasp from the bracelet. Not the whole bracelet, only the clasp. "I found this under the west dressing room door." Eliza's heart tightened. "So the room was opened?" "Yes." "By the Duchess?" I asked her. "And," she said, "Lady Beatrice gave it to her before died." Eliza could not stop herself. "That is impossible." The Duke looked at her sharply. "Why?"
Eliza hesitated. Mrs. Dawley spoke first, because her late Grace never met Lady Clarissa Renford.
The Duke turned slowly to the housekeeper. "What?" Mrs. Dawley's face paled, but she stood firm. "Your Grace was in mourning. Many callers were refused. Lady Clarissa never crossed this threshold before your betrothal." The Duke stared at the clasp in his hand. Clarissa had lied, not carelessly, confidently, as if she expected grief to make him forget the facts of his own life. "Mrs. Dawley," he said, "wake Nanny Pike. Have her sit with Oliver." Eliza's pulse quickened. "Your Grace! You are coming with me." Mrs. Dawley looked alarmed. "Your Grace, it is improper. So is theft from a dead Duchess's room." He turned and left. Eliza followed. They moved through the back corridor to avoid guests, then crossed the older part of the house, where the air smelled of dust, cedarwood and extinguished candles. The west wing had been closed since Beatrice's death. The Duke stopped before the dressing room door. For several seconds he did not move. Eliza watched his hand tightened around the key. "Your Grace," she said gently, "you do not have to." "Yes," he said. "I do." He unlocked the door. The room opened with a soft grunt. Dust should have covered everything. It did not. That was the first wrong thing. The curtains had been disturbed. A drawer stood open. The dressing table had been searched. A faint trace of perfume hung in the air. Not old perfume. Fresh, sharp, white lilies. Clarissa's scent. The Duke stepped inside as though entering a church where someone had broken the altar. Eliza remained near the door. She had seen grief before. It made people private in strange ways. The room still held Beatrice Ashford's life in fragments. A pale shawl draped over a chair, hair combs in a silver tray, a half-read book by the window, a painted miniature of Oliver as an infant beside a vase of dried roses. The Duke picked up the miniature. His thumb passed once over the glass. Then he set it down. "What were they looking for?" Eliza whispered. The Duke opened one drawer, then another. Jewels, perhaps. But his voice said he did not believe it. Eliza looked around carefully. The room had not been ransacked like a thief's work. It had been searched like someone knew exactly what they wanted and was angry not to find it. She noticed the writing desk. Small, painted ivory. One drawer slightly uneven. "Your Grace." The Duke turned. Eliza pointed. He crossed to the desk and pulled the drawer. It stuck, then opened, empty, almost. At the back, a strip of paper had been caught under the wood. The Duke removed it carefully. Only a torn sentence remained. If Edmund marries again, watch the woman chosen for him. Eliza's skin prickled. The Duke looked at the words as if they had reached across 3 years and struck him. That is Beatrice's hand. There may have been more. Nothing. Eliza knelt and looked beneath the desk. A scratch marked the floor where the desk had recently been moved. Your Grace, someone pulled this away from the wall. Together, they shifted it. Behind the desk, hidden in a narrow gap, was a small leather case. The Duke froze. Did you know it was there? Eliza asked. No. He opened it. Inside lay several letters tied with a faded ribbon, and one folded paper sealed with black wax. The Duke's hand trembled. The seal bore the crest of the Renford family, Clarissa's family. He broke it. Eliza watched his face as he read. His expression changed from confusion to disbelief, then to something colder. What is it? She whispered. He did not answer. Instead, he handed her one letter. She should not have read it, but he offered, so she did. The letter was from Beatrice to a woman named Lady Marianne Renford, Clarissa's mother. The words were polite, but frightened. Lady Marianne, I understand now that what you proposed was never friendship. I cannot support your son's debts, nor can I encourage my husband to sponsor him. Please do not send Lord Halrick to Hartwick again. His attentions are unwelcome. If he has told your daughter that she may one day become mistress here, that is a cruelty I beg you to correct. Eliza looked up slowly. Her Grace knew them. The Duke's voice was hollow. Not Clarissa. Her mother. Her brother. He read another letter, then another. With each page, the room seemed to darken. Lord Halrick had once tried to attach himself to Beatrice. When she rejected him, the Renfords turned bitter. Lady Marianne had begged Beatrice to help repair their family debts. Beatrice refused. Then came the final letter, the one sealed in black. The Duke read it silently, then gripped the desk so hard his knuckles whitened. Eliza stepped forward. Your Grace, he handed it to her. Only a few lines, but enough. Edmund, if anything happens to me, do not trust sudden grief. Do not trust those who arrive with sympathy and accounts already prepared. Above all, keep Oliver from the Renfords. Halrick said today that a house without a mother can be entered through the child. Eliza felt sick. Did you ever receive this? No. The Duke's voice was barely human. No, I never received it. The implication hung between them. Someone had hidden Beatrice's warning. To basket. Someone had waited 3 years, and someone had arranged for Clarissa Renford to become Duchess of Ravenholt after all. A sound came from the corridor, a soft click. The Duke turned. The door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed the room as the lamp went out. Elziza gasped. The Duke moved instantly toward the door. Locked from outside, he struck it once with his shoulders. Open this door. No answer. Then smoke began to creep under the threshold. Eliza stepped back. Your Grace. The Duke looked down. Smoke, not much, but enough. Someone had lit a fire in the corridor, not to burn the house, to smoke them out or keep them trapped until something else was done. The Duke cursed under his breath and pulled at the handle. Eliza, the window. She rushed to it, stuck, painted shut. The smoke thickened. The Duke seized a chair and smashed the window glass. Cold air burst inside. Eliza coughed, covering her mouth. The drop outside was not high enough to kill, but high enough to break bones. The Duke looked at her. Can you climb? Yes. He tore down the curtain and twisted the fabric quickly. Eliza stared. You have done this before. I was not always old enough to be sensible. Even in terror, the answer startled a breathless laugh from her. Then, above the crackle of smoke, came a scream. Not from the corridor. From the nursery wing, Oliver. The Duke went still. His face changed in a way Eliza would never forget. Pure fear, the kind no title can hide. "Oliver," he whispered. He turned back to the door and slammed into it again. "Eliza, climb out, find help." No. He looked at her. Not again. "Your son is screaming, and you will do him no good unconscious on the floor." She knew he was right. Hated that he was right. The Duke secured the curtain to a heavy iron bracket near the window. "Eliza, go," she climbed. Rain had begun again, slicking the stone wall. Her hands burned against the fabric. The ground seemed too far below, but the sound of Oliver's scream drove fear out of her body. She dropped into wet grass, pain shooting through her ankle. She ran, around the west side of the house, past the kitchen garden, past the chapel door, toward the nursery wing. A side entrance stood open. That was wrong. It was always locked. Eliza entered. The corridor was dark. Then she heard Oliver sobbing. "In here!" She followed the sound to the old blue nursery. The door was locked from the outside. "Eliza!" he cried. "I am here." She grabbed the handle, locked tight. Footsteps sounded behind her. Eliza turned. Lord Halric Vane emerged from the shadows, holding a key. He was still dressed for celebration, though his cravat was loose, and his smile was gone. "Well," he said softly, "the little maid runs fast." Eliza backed against the door. "Open it. Once you stop interfering." Inside, Oliver cried, "Miss Bell." Halric's eyes hardened. "That is the trouble with children. They attach themselves to the wrong people." Eliza's voice shook, but she held his gaze. "You locked a child in a room." "I placed a future duke where he could not disrupt adult decisions." "What decisions?" Halric stepped closer. "The duke should never have married my sister with that boy still clinging to old loyalties. Clarissa needed a household, not a nursery rebellion." "Eliza!" Oliver screamed. Halric's smile thinned. "Listen to him, already ruined by your softness." Eliza looked at the key in his hand, then at the candle bracket beside her, then back at him. She did not think. She seized the brass candle holder and struck his wrist. The key fell. Halric lunged. Eliza dropped to the floor, grabbed the key, and screamed for help. He caught her arm. Pain flashed. Then a voice thundered down the corridor. "Release her." The Duke stood at the far end of the hall. Soot marked his face. Blood darkened one sleeve where the broken window had cut him, but he looked like a man carved from wrath itself. Halric let Eliza go. The Duke came forward slowly. "You locked my son in a room." Halric lifted his hands. "Ravenholt, listen." "No, one word. Quiet. Terrible." Halric looked past him and shouted, "Clarissa!" The Duchess appeared behind the Duke. For the first time all day, she did not look composed. She looked furious and frightened. "Eliza has turned this house against me," she said. The Duke did not turn around. "No," he said. "You did that before she ever spoke." Clarissa's eyes moved to Eliza. Pure hatred. "You are a maid." Eliza, shaking, unlocked the blue nursery door. Oliver burst out and ran into her arms. The Duke turned then. He saw it again, his son running past everyone to the maid. But this time, he did not see insult. He saw truth. Clarissa saw it too, and her voice turned sharp enough to cut. "That is unnatural. A servant has no right to a child's heart." The Duke looked at his son trembling in Eliza's arms, then at his new bride. And slowly, with awful clarity, he said, "A person earns a child's heart by protecting it." Clarissa's face went white. Before she could answer, Mrs. Dawley arrived with footmen. The Duke pointed at Halric. "Secure him!" Halric protested, but the footman obeyed. Clarissa lifted her chin. "You cannot humiliate my brother on our wedding day." The Duke's voice was cold. "Madam, your brother locked my son in a room and trapped me in another, with smoke under the door. Humiliation is the least generous thing I could offer." Eliza held Oliver close. But she knew the danger was not finished, because Clarissa was not looking at the Duke anymore. She was looking at the child, and in her eyes was the terror of a woman whose plan had failed too soon. By midnight, Hartwick Hall no longer felt like a wedding house. The garlands still hung. The flowers still perfumed the air. The dining room still glittered with crystal and silver. But no one laughed now. Guests had been quietly sent to their rooms. Servants stood in pairs. Footmen guarded the west corridor. Lord Halrick had been confined in the steward's office under watch. The Duke had ordered every outer gate locked until the magistrate arrived in the morning. And Lady Clarissa, Duchess of Ravenholt for less than a day, sat in the drawing room like a queen who had discovered too late that her crown was made of glass. Eliza stood near the door, holding Oliver's hand. The Duke had asked her to bring him. Not ordered, asked. That alone told her something had changed. Clarissa looked at Oliver first, then at Eliza. You mean to try me before servants? The Duke stood by the fireplace, Beatrice's letters on the table beside him. No, I mean for my son to hear the truth adults tried to bury. Clarissa laughed softly. He is 6. He is old enough to be threatened. Her smile vanished. The Duke lifted the torn warning letter. My wife warned me about your family before she died. Clarissa's eyes flickered. Only once. But everyone saw it. She was unwell, Clarissa said. Grief makes saints of dead women. It does not make them reliable. The room went cold. Eliza felt Oliver's hand tighten. The Duke's voice lowered. Do not speak of Beatrice again as if you knew her. Clarissa rose. I know enough. I know she died and left you impossible. I know this house became a tomb. I know everyone in society pitied the poor widowed Duke who could not at his own old child without remembering what he lost. The word struck him. Eliza saw it, so did Clarissa. And because cruelty feeds when it finds a wound, she continued. You needed a wife. No, the Duke said. Your family needed my name. Clarissa's eyes hardened. Yes, we needed it. Do you think noble families survive on poetry and mourning? My brother had debts. My mother had creditors. I had no dowry large enough for safety. You had land, title, and a child too young to question anything, Eliza whispered. But he did question. Clarissa turned on her. Because of you? No, Eliza said. Because children know when they are not safe. Clarissa's mouth twisted. Do not pretend virtue. You are a servant who enjoyed being needed by your betters. The old Eliza might have bowed her head. The old Eliza might have apologized for standing in a room where she had every right to speak the truth. But Oliver was holding her hand, and the Duke was listening, so she did not lower her eyes. I enjoyed seeing him eat again, she said. I enjoyed hearing him laugh after months of silence. I enjoyed watching a lonely child remember that he was alive. If that is a crime in your world, your grace, then your world is poorer than mine. No one moved. Then Mrs. Dawley made a sound that might have been a cough or approval. Clarissa looked as though she had been slapped. The Duke picked up another paper. The question is not whether your family wanted Hartwick. The question is what happened 3 years ago. Clarissa froze. Eliza's breath caught. 3 years ago. Beatrice's death. Halrick's confinement. The hidden letters, the stolen bracelet, all of it pointed backward. Clarissa's voice became careful. You are grieving again, Edmund. It clouds your judgment. The Duke's face closed. You will address me as Ravenholt. That shook her a little. You cannot think I killed your wife. I think your family hid her letter and entered her rooms after death. I think your brother knew too much about Oliver's habits. I think you came into this marriage not as a bride, but as an agent. Clarissa's eyes flashed. An agent? For your mother. At that, her expression changed. Not guilt, pain. It was so unexpected that Eliza almost pitied her. Almost. Clarissa sat slowly. My mother did what mothers do. The Duke's voice was hard. No, She did what desperate women do when they mistake survival for entitlement. Clarissa laughed, but there were tears in it now. You speak like a man who has never watched creditors measure the chairs in your nursery. Like a man who has never heard your mother whisper which gentleman might buy you gently and which would not.
The rooms fell silent.
Even the Duke did not answer at once. Clarissa looked at Eliza. And you, do not stand there with your soft servant morality. Poverty is not holy. Fear is not noble. A woman uses what doors open, or she is dragged through worse ones. Eliza's voice softened. And Oliver was one of the doors? Clarissa looked away. That was answer enough. The Duke's anger changed. It did not disappear. It became heavier, sadder. You could have come to me honestly, he said. Clarissa smiled bitterly. Would you have married me honestly? No. Then there is your answer. Oliver suddenly spoke. Small voice. Clear enough for everyone. Did you take Mamma's bracelet? Clarissa closed her eyes. For one moment, she looked very young. Then she opened them. Yes. Why? Clarissa looked at the boy. Because I thought if I wore something of hers, people would believe I belonged here. Oliver considered this, then asked, Did you say Papa wanted me to forget her? Clarissa swallowed. Yes. Why? This time she did not answer. Eliza knelt beside Oliver. My lord, no, he said. The boy stepped forward, still holding Eliza's hand.
Why?
Clarissa looked at him. Something in her face cracked. Because your remembering made me feel like a thief. The truth landed quietly. No thunder, no scream. Only a woman, admitting the thing beneath every scheme. She had not come to mother the child. She had come to replace the dead. And the child's love for a maid had exposed what silk could not hide. The Duke turned toward Mrs. Dawley. Bring Lord Halrick. Minutes later, Halrick was pushed into the drawing room, furious and dishevelled. This is absurd, he snapped. I demand. The Duke cut him off. Where is Lady Marianne? Halrick went still. Clarissa looked at him sharply. The Duke stepped closer. Your mother is not ill in Bath, is she? Halrick said nothing. Eliza felt the room tighten. The Duke's voice became very quiet. She is here, Clarissa whispered. No. Halrick shot her a warning look. The Duke noticed. Search the east guest rooms, he ordered. A footman left at once. Clarissa stood. Edmund. Ravenholt, please. Why? Her face drained of colour. Because if she is here, then she did not merely arrange the marriage. She came to finish something. Oliver moved closer to Eliza. Minutes stretched, then a shout came from the corridor. Footsteps. The door opened. 2 footmen entered, with an older woman between them. Lady Marianne Renford, silver-haired, elegant, furious, and in her hand was a small iron key. The Duke stared at it. The old nursery key, Mrs. Dawley whispered. Lady Marianne lifted her chin. This is beneath your dignity, Ravenholt. The Duke looked at her with murder in his eyes and law in his voice. What did you intend to do with my son? Clarissa whispered. Mamma? Lady Marianne sighed. As though everyone had disappointed her by forcing honesty too early. The boy was to be sent away. The room went utterly still. Eliza covered Oliver's ears instinctively, but he had already heard. Where? The Duke asked. A private school in the north. Respectable. Quiet. Far from that maid's influence. You mean far from my protection. I mean far from memory. Lady Marianne snapped. That child would have destroyed my daughter's position in a month. He already had. Clarissa stared at her mother. You told me he would be managed. Yes, and you failed to match him. Clarissa recoiled as if struck. The Duke looked at Halrick. And the smoke? Halrick swallowed. Lady Marianne answered coldly. A distraction. Nothing more. A locked room filling with smoke is not a distraction. You broke the window. Did you not? Eliza felt sick. There are people who confess without shame because they do not believe consequence was made for them. Lady Marianne was one. The Duke's voice was low. "Did you hide Beatrice's letter?" Lady Marianne looked at him. For the first time, something like satisfaction entered her face. "Yes," Clarissa gasped. Halric looked away. The Duke went pale. Lady Marianne continued. "Your wife was clever, too clever. She knew Halric had spoken foolishly. She knew I wanted my daughter placed here one day. She wrote to you. I made certain grief kept you ignorant." The Duke's hands curled. "And her death?" Lady Marianne smiled thinly. "Illness took your wife, not I. Though I admit, her absence made certain plans easier. The answer was terrible because it was not enough. She had not killed Beatrice, but she had used her death like an open door. And now she had tried to take the child too." The Duke turned to the footman. "Hold them until the magistrate arrives." All three. Clarissa flinched. "Me?" He looked at her. "You threatened my son, entered my wife's room, lied to this household, and conspired to remove my child." Tears filled Clarissa's eyes. "I did not know she meant tonight." "But you knew enough." Clarissa looked at Oliver. "I am sorry," she whispered. Oliver did not move. Eliza did not tell him to answer. Children should not be forced to comfort those who frightened them. The Renfords were taken away before dawn. When the drawing room emptied, the Duke seemed to age 10 years in one breath. Oliver stood across from him, still holding Eliza's hand. The Duke looked at the child, then at their joined hands. This was the moment Eliza feared. Now that danger had passed, pride might return. The Duke might remember rank. He might remember that sons belonged to fathers, not maids. Instead, he knelt, not to Eliza, to Oliver. "I failed you," he said. Oliver looked uncertain. The Duke's voice broke slightly. "I thought keeping grief quiet would keep you safe from it. But silence left room for others to speak lies. I am sorry." Oliver's eyes filled. "Will Miss Bell go away?" The Duke looked at Eliza. "No." The word was simple, firm. Oliver whispered, "Promise." The Duke held out his hand. "I promise." The boy hesitated, then took it, not letting go of Eliza. For a moment, the three of them stood connected in the dim light of a ruined wedding night. Father, son, and maid. Not a family, not yet, but no longer strangers divided by grief. Weeks passed. The scandal spread, as scandals do. Some said the Duke's bride had been dragged from Hartwick in her wedding silk. Some said the maid had uncovered a murder plot. Some said little Lord Oliver had known the truth before any adult, because children see what pride refuses to notice. The legal proceedings took months. The marriage was annulled. Lady Marianne lost influence. Lord Halric disappeared from polite society. Clarissa was sent to live quietly with an aunt in Devonshire, where perhaps for the first time she had to learn who she was without her mother's ambition speaking through her mouth. At Hartwick Hall, the West Room was opened. Not as a shrine, not as a tomb. The Duke brought Oliver there one morning and showed him his mother's letters, her miniature, her bracelet, and the blue shawl she had worn when she held him as a baby. Oliver cried. So did the Duke. Eliza waited outside until Oliver called for her. "Miss Bell," he said, "Mamma had your colour eyes." Eliza smiled gently. "Then she had very ordinary eyes, my lord." The Duke, standing by the window, said quietly, "I doubt that." Eliza looked away before anyone could see her blush. By spring, Hartwick Hall had changed. There was laughter again, but not the polished kind brought out for guests. Real laughter. Oliver ran through corridors. The Duke took breakfast in the nursery twice a week. Then 3 times, then every morning he was home. He learned that Oliver hated boiled carrots, feared thunderstorms, loved maps, and still woke sometimes calling for the mother he barely remembered. On those nights, the Duke no longer sent for Eliza alone. He came too, awkwardly at first, then steadily.
One evening, after Oliver had fallen asleep between a wooden horse and an open picture book,
The Duke walked Eliza to the nursery door. "You have given him back to me," he said. Eliza shook her head. "No, Your Grace. I kept him safe until you were ready to come back." The words struck him softly. He looked down the corridor toward the west wing. I do not deserve such kindness." "Children do not need parents who deserve them," Eliza said. "They need parents who return." The Duke looked at her then. Really looked. Not as a servant, not as a convenience, not as the woman his son had chosen first, but as the woman who had dared to tell him the truth when everyone else bowed. "Eliza," he said. It was the first time he used her name without Miss Bell. Her breath caught. He seemed to know it, because he did not step closer. He only bowed his head. "Thank you." Years later, people would still speak of the wedding morning when the Duke's new bride reached for his son, and the child ran past her to the maid. They would call it scandal. They would call it humiliation. They would call it the first crack in a false duchess's crown. But those who knew the truth called it something else. A child's warning. Because Oliver Ashford had not run from a bride, he had run toward safety, and in doing so he saved his father from a marriage built on lies, saved his mother's memory from being stolen, and changed Hartwick Hall forever. As for Eliza Bell, she remained. Not because the Duke commanded it, not because the child begged, but because one day, in a quiet nursery filled with morning light, Edmund Ashford asked her, not as a master asks a servant, but as a man asks the only woman brave enough to stand beside the truth. And for once, Eliza did not have to choose between love and duty. Because in Hartwick Hall, after all the locked rooms had been opened, they had finally become the same thing.